It's not every day you get to watch a group of heavily armored bounty hunters throw fuel tanks at each other to settle a score. But that's exactly the kind of situation our protagonist finds themselves in today. Picture this: a group of the toughest, brawniest beings you can imagine, standing face to face in a tense showdown, their muscles practically bulging through their suits, each one trying to outdo the other in strength and aggression. And in the middle of it all, standing just slightly above average height, is a human. No armor, no extra brawn. Just a person with a quick mind and a bigger-than-life attitude. Welcome to the world of Aiming the Machismo, a tale of humor, tension, and survival in a universe where humans, despite being the so-called token species, have somehow managed to become the wild cards in a galaxy filled with intimidating alien species. And this particular human, they're about to teach these beefed-up bounty hunters a thing or two about getting things done without throwing punches. Today, we're diving into the story of a human crew member who's been through their fair share of crazy situations, but nothing quite like this. It all begins on a quiet day at a bustling spaceport, the kind of place where all sorts of beings gather. Aliens of every shape and size, from towering brutes to slinky, slippery creatures, all making deals, trading goods, and solving problems. But for our crew, it's just another stop on their routine delivery mission. Simple enough, right, wrong. Because as it turns out, this spaceport is home to a few complicated characters. And when a pair of bulky bounty hunters, clad in intimidating, high-tech armor, stroll up and start making demands, the human crew member realizes that things are about to get a lot more difficult. These bounty hunters are not just large in stature, they're large in personality too, and their egos, well, they could probably fill a starship. But here's the thing, this human, they don't back down from a challenge. They may be small in comparison to some of the galactic heavyweights around them, but they've got something the others don't, a brain that can think fast, and a sense of humor that can cut through the tension like a hot knife through butter. In this galaxy, that's sometimes all you need to survive. So while these bounty hunters puff out their chests, ready to prove their worth in whatever macho way they can, this human has a different plan, one that involves delivery schedules, busted equipment, and, most importantly, avoiding any unnecessary violence. After all, they've got a mission to complete. But as you'd expect, things don't go smoothly. The fuel nozzle for the ship's fuel is broken. And that's what kicks off this wild interaction. The human crew's task is to make sure everything runs smoothly and that their deliveries go as planned. But with bounty hunters and other tough customers trying to push their way to the front of the line, our protagonist has to navigate more than just mechanical failures. The entire situation threatens to devolve into chaos. You can practically feel the tension in the air, especially when the bounty hunters start arguing with a group of even bigger, more terrifying figures. A crew of mercenaries who look like they could crush anyone in their way without a second thought. What starts as a simple fuel delivery soon turns into a high-stakes standoff. Will the human crew member be able to make the delivery and get out of there without further incident? Or will they find themselves caught in the middle of a full-blown brawl between two groups of ridiculously macho individuals, both determined to prove who's the toughest of them all? As the human protagonist, along with their two loyal crew members, Blip and Blop, each with their own unique quirks, try to defuse the situation, they realize that the stakes are higher than they thought. The bounty hunters might be there to capture some wanted criminals, but as it turns out, those criminals are much closer than they think. And suddenly the mission shifts. The team finds themselves not just delivering parts, but also caught in the middle of a dangerous game with galactic bounty hunters who have their sights set on a much bigger prize. This isn't just about fuel anymore. It's about survival, and as the human crew member quickly discovers, being small and token in a galaxy filled with towering figures is both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it allows them to slip under the radar, to think and act quickly when others are too busy flexing their muscles. But on the other hand, when things get out of hand, it also means they can easily become the target of those who prefer to settle things with their fists rather than their heads. The clock is ticking, the situation is spiraling, and the crew is about to find out just how far they can push their luck before the bounty hunters, and maybe even the entire spaceport, turn against them. Will the human crew manage to make their delivery, repair the equipment, and escape the escalating chaos? Or will they be forced to face off against a full-on brawl between those who rely on brute force and those who rely on wit? The tension builds as the scene shifts to a chaotic, muscle-bound showdown, with alien bounty hunters and mercenaries jockeying for position. The stakes couldn't be higher, and our human protagonist finds themselves standing right in the middle of it all. The crew has to think fast, act fast, and stay calm. But as the voices grow louder and the threats grow more serious, the human must wonder if they've bitten off more than they can chew. But there's no turning back now. The mission is in motion, and the human crew is about to find themselves caught between two walls of pure muscle and testosterone-fueled egos, with one hand on the hover sled and the other trying to keep their crew in line. The protagonist moves forward. But as they step out into the open, the sounds of a full-blown showdown erupt behind them. It's all about to go down, and the only question left is whether or not they'll make it out in one piece. Stay tuned, because what happens next will leave you wondering just how far a token human can push back against the might of the galaxy's toughest and most macho individuals. The chaos was unfolding fast. The human crew member stood at the edge of the spaceport. The low hum of machinery around them, a stark contrast to the rising tension. It was like the air itself had thickened, as if everything in the room knew what was about to happen. The bounty hunters were still shouting, their voices a mix of gruff authority and raw machismo, each one trying to prove their dominance. And behind them, the mercenary crew was growing impatient, their massive frames and tight stances like a storm cloud, just waiting to burst. The tension was unbearable, and every second felt like it was stretching longer than it should. The human crew member's heart pounded in their chest as they glanced back at Blip and Blop. Blip, the taller of the two, was standing a little straighter, now trying to look more confident, despite her frills flattening against her neck, an obvious sign of her discomfort. Blop, on the other hand, looked like he wanted to disappear. His eyes darted back and forth, focusing on nothing, lost in his own thoughts. He was always the more reserved of the two, and now, standing in the midst of these towering, loud figures, it was easy to see why. They had been through tough spots before, but this was different. This wasn't just a routine stop at a fuel station or a quick drop-off at a spaceport. This was a confrontation, one that was slowly getting more dangerous with each passing moment. The bounty hunters had the look of people who didn't back down. No matter how ridiculous the situation got, they were all about asserting their superiority. But the human crew member wasn't going to let them get away with it. "Let's keep it cool," the humans said under their breath, more to themselves than anyone else. "We can still make this work." Blip shot a glance at them, a small nod of acknowledgement. "You're sure about this?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. "I don't have much of a choice, do I?" the human replied. trying to keep the edge of panic out of their voice. Just stick to the plan. Delivery first. We don't have to engage with them more than we have to. Blop seemed to nod, though it was more of a reflex than genuine confidence. The two of them were following their crew member's lead, but you could tell it wasn't easy. There was a constant underlying fear, one they didn't like to show, but it was clear to anyone who paid attention. They were alien, yes, but still not quite as ready for this level of chaos as their human companion. Meanwhile, the bounty hunters continued to posture, flexing their muscles and throwing insults back and forth. One of them, the tallest and most imposing of the group, stepped forward, his heavy bootsteps echoing in the spaceport like thunder. His voice boomed across the room, making the walls shake with the force of his words. "This fuel is ours," he growled. "We don't have time for your little deliveries. We've got a mission, and no one is getting in our way." His eyes, cold and hard, locked onto the human crew member, as if daring them to challenge him. The human stared back, refusing to blink. "We're not in your way," they said calmly, though the tension in their shoulders betrayed their true feelings. "We're just here to make a delivery, get some fuel, and get out. No need for any drama. If you want to fight for it, well, good luck with that. I'm not going to stop you, but that nozzle's still broken." The bounty hunter's face twisted into something between a scowl and a grin. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" he spat, voice dripping with disdain. "This is our turf. This is our business. And if you want fuel, you better know your place." A ripple of nervous laughter came from the mercenaries at the back of the room, some of them cracking their knuckles as if they were waiting for the inevitable to happen. The situation was escalating quickly. No one had made a move yet, but it was clear that any second could send it spiraling out of control. It was then that the human crew member noticed something strange in the distance. A flicker of movement from the corner of their eye, a shadow, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Their hearts skipped a beat, and a chill ran down their spine. They turned slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse of something, or someone approaching. From the far end of the hangar, it wasn't just a casual bystander. Whoever this was, they were walking with purpose. The human immediately reached for their communicator, sending a quick message to their captain. No time for formalities. No. Time for a proper report. Just a quick, sharp message. Incoming. Possible problem. The response came almost instantly. Cold and direct. "Stay calm. You're on your own for this one." That was all the reassurance the human needed. None. It wasn't that they didn't trust their captain, but there was something unsettling about the captain's words. It felt like they had been left to fend for themselves in the middle of this brewing storm. No backup, no support, just them, blip and blop. And that was when everything started to unravel. The shadow at the far end of the spaceport was growing closer, and the bounty hunters seemed to notice it too. Their focus wavered, just for a moment, as they shifted their gaze toward the new arrival, but it was enough to break the standoff. The massive bounty hunter, who had been barking orders at everyone, let out a low growl and took a step forward, pushing his chest out. "Who's this?" he demanded, his voice now laced with more suspicion than anger. The figure, now fully visible, stepped into the light. It wasn't another bounty hunter, nor was it one of the mercenaries. No, this figure was far more unsettling, taller than even the biggest of the bounty hunters, yet more agile, sleek, and far more dangerous in the way they moved. Their sharp eyes scanned the room, taking in the scene with a kind of cold, calculating precision that sent a ripple of unease through the air. The human crew member's breath caught in their throat. They didn't recognize this person, but one thing was certain. They weren't here to make friends. The bounty hunter noticed the tension in the room too. But instead of backing down, he squared his shoulders and stepped closer to the new arrival. "You don't belong here," he said, voice growing louder, angrier. "This is our turf." The new figure didn't say a word. Instead, they reached into their cloak and pulled out something small and sleek, something that hummed with a quiet, deadly energy. The human crew member's heart raced. Whatever was about to happen next, they knew they had just stepped into something much darker than a simple fuel delivery. And with that, the first strike was made. The hum of the sleek device in the stranger's hand broke the silence like a crack of thunder. The bounty hunters paused, their tough stances faltering for the first time. And even the mercenaries, who had been so eager to test their strength on each other, now shifted uneasily. The air grew thick with tension as the figure's eyes, cold and calculating, never left the massive bounty hunter. With one swift movement, they activated the device. In a flash, the entire room seemed to change. The soft blue glow of the device expanded, flickering through the spaceport like a wave of energy. The bounty hunters and mercenaries, once sure of their dominance, froze. The energy field seemed to sap their strength, their movements sluggish, as though their very muscles were being drained of power. The human crew member's heart raced. Whatever was happening, it wasn't good. They could feel the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Like a storm that had just started to rage, the towering bounty hunter, who had been leading the charge, staggered back a few steps, his massive arms shaking. His voice, which had been so full of bravado just moments ago, now carried a faint tremor. What is this?" he growled, his body struggling to move, as if the gravity in the room had suddenly intensified. The stranger didn't respond. Instead, they turned their eyes toward the human crew member and nodded once, briefly but meaningfully. It was a signal, and without thinking, the human knew exactly what they had to do. "Blip! Blop! Take cover!" the human shouted, turning to face the oncoming threat. The stranger, who had been watching from the side, didn't flinch. Instead, they took a step forward and raised the device once more, this time pointing it toward the enraged bounty hunter. The room seemed to hold its breath as the energy field pulsed brighter, and the bounty hunter suddenly faltered, his body dropping to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. The force was overwhelming, and it hit him harder than anyone had expected. The other bounty hunters, seeing their leader incapacitated, hesitated for a moment. Their bravado faltered, and they quickly backed away, unwilling to push their luck any further. The human crew member's heart still pounded in their chest, but the immediate danger had passed. The mercenaries, seeing the situation turn in their favor, were now more concerned with their own safety than continuing their posturing. One by one, they began to back off, realizing that the battle wasn't worth it anymore. Blip and Blop stood by, both looking slightly stunned, but relieved. The human crew member, though, wasn't taking any chances. "Let's go! Now!" they said, urgency in their voice. Without looking back, they pushed the sled toward the door, the stranger stepping aside to allow them passage. As the door slid open, the human crew member cast one last glance at the now silent spaceport. The bounty hunters were still down, the mercenaries unsure of what to do next. No one had been seriously harmed, but the tension in the air was palpable. This was far from over, and they all knew it. Once outside, the cool air of the spaceport hit their faces, and the human crew member exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the last few moments lift off their shoulders. They were out. They had made it. But just as they were about to breathe a sigh of relief, they heard a voice from behind. Not so fast, came the voice of the stranger, now standing at the entrance, the device still glowing faintly in their hand. You'll want to be careful. Those bounty hunters, they won't forget what happened here, and neither will the ones they're hunting. The human crew member turned to face the stranger, their hand instinctively reaching for their communicator. "Who are you?" they asked, trying to steady their voice. "Why help us?" The stranger's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Let's just say we have a common interest. You've made some enemies today, and they'll be gunning for you. But that's not your biggest problem. You'll find out soon enough. Just be ready." And with that, the stranger turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving the human crew member with more questions than answers. The moment had come to a close, but the war wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. As they boarded their ship, Blip and Blop fell into step behind them. Both silent for the moment, the hum of the engines powered up, and the crew member couldn't help but wonder just how deep they were getting into something far bigger than they had ever expected. But they couldn't dwell on that now. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and they were no longer just a delivery crew. They had just become players in something far more dangerous, and no one, least of all them, knew where it would lead. But one thing was for sure. They weren't going down without a fight.